Welcome to A Differentiated Life, Session 6. If you've just joined us, my name is Catherine Kissel and I'm a counselling psychologist. During this time when we're all confined to our homes, I've decided to offer regular therapy sessions via Facebook as my way of supporting the wider community. My clinical approach is all about enhancing differentiation. So my videos think about a live issue that we're facing and offer some practical tools to help you take a step towards a differentiated life. So today's challenge is what to do when you're working from home and find yourself procrastinating. A quick check of the internet gives us a lot of sane, straightforward advice about working from home. There's loads of advice out there about what to do, and it's really good. It talks about getting dressed, so you can shift from home mode into work mode, setting boundaries, a demarcation of space and time, your hours, where you work, your routine, setting the scene. Some people suggest walking to work or having a particular desk space set up. Then there's the advice about having your water cooler chat, so time to connect informally via social media or video conferencing. And obviously taking breaks so you can keep up your productivity and your concentration. So all of these are fantastic, rational, thoughtful pieces of advice. And it's what I talk about when I lecture on virtual work to management students at LSBU. But then I introduced them to the shift in dynamics, how things change when the virtual team comes under pressure. That good theory and practice can be swiftly lost as the stress increases. And this captures the essence of learning to live a differentiated life. It's all about taking you from simply knowing the good practice to understanding why you know what you should do, but you don't do it. All of these videos are about trying to help you gain the skills to enable you to address the deeper factors that sabotage really good practice that we know works. And it's not very often talked about in those tried and tested tips about working from home. So there are lots of different ways that stress and pressure affect us. And today we're going to talk about the impact of procrastination, when work stretches out far beyond the time allotted to it. And to talk about it, I'm going to use a client case study. And like I always do, this isn't based on one particular person, but an amalgamation through my experiences as a therapist. My client had recently shifted to virtual working from a team environment, and she was finding herself struggling. She started the day with good intentions, but she found that she got nothing done. She would suddenly be filled with panic as the end of the day approached, and she would end up abandoning her non-work activities in a rush to complete something. Life was getting out of kilter, and she didn't know what to do in order to get some order in place. And to be honest, in our therapy sessions, I did start with the practicalities, just like the websites. But very quickly, I got the feeling that she knew all of that. And focus on it felt superficial. It just didn't get to the nub of what was happening. So we pushed a little deeper. And what emerged was an anxiety around her relationship with her manager. The shift from face-to-face work, where she was seen at her desk, where she'd have regular check-ins and known expectations, had completely altered as she'd gone into virtual work. There was a lack of touch points and unclear expectations. And this has heightened her anxiety about what her manager thought of her. She was worried about disappointing her, the impact of her prospects at work, concern whether this was the right job for her. Now, our tried and tested tips would have already told us that shifting to virtual work, it's even more important to clarify expectation with managers, that regular feedback is even more essential because it's harder to maintain trust online. But that rational way of thinking, what I call primary task thinking, where you tackle the actual problem that you're facing and create a working agreement, got lost. Instead, her secondary agenda or the emotional agenda had taken over. And suddenly all behaviours and activities are focused on lowering the emotion being felt. At this point, when the relationship feels in jeopardy and performance feels under question, we tend to shift to extremes. And it's our attempt to bind the anxiety that we're feeling and to get rid of it. Some people over-communicate. They're seeking reassurance, they're seeking togetherness, they're seeking soothing from the other. Other people under-communicate and withdraw. And this is what my client was doing. She was hiding behind emails. She was finding herself procrastinating and putting work off because the work was provoking anxiety in her that she wasn't good enough. And she sought to avoid feeling anxious by leaving the work until the anxiety about deadlines became the motivating force. And the problem is that this response can actually sabotage her in the long run. It can become a self-fulfilling prophecy because the manager feels that withdrawal, and in turn that raises their anxiety. And if they don't have a high level of differentiation, if they're not able to soothe their anxiety, then they may seek to bind it by becoming more questioning, more probing, more demanding. Do you remember that idea of co-created relationships that we talked about in session 4? Well, our working relationships are co-created too. So her withdrawal could provoke her boss's pursuit. And this could all go on where there is absolutely no evidence that her performance was under question. There would be no complaints, that her history in the firm was absolutely brilliant. So how can we stop procrastination as we shift to online working? Well, first of all, take the good advice. Sometimes procrastination is as simple as the fact you're bored. Go do something different. Go do something fun, chat to a friend, set a boundary on the time, choose a different room to work in, reward yourself. See if any of that helps. If nothing changes, then it might be time for some self-reflection. Check in on how you're feeling. It can't change until it's been heard. It's a bit like dusting. If we try to sweep all our emotions under the carpet and ignore them, they don't go away. They just build up until we have to get the vacuum cleaner out. So connect with how you're feeling. Offer it acceptance and compassion. Remind yourself that no wonder you're feeling anxious. You're working in a completely new environment. There is a new agenda. You're vulnerable. You might feel at sea. And to be honest, work might feel really irrelevant in the greater scheme of things right now. And then I want you to notice, what have you been doing to try to bind those feelings? My client, well, she was procrastinating, putting things off. It was linked to withdrawal. It was linked to avoidance. What shifts have you been making? And then I'm going to encourage you to make a step of differentiation, to do something different. Often with my clients, it's as simple as almost doing the opposite to what you would normally do. If your tendency is to withdraw, then it's about how do you connect. If your tendency is towards fusion and overconnection, then how do you create space? And taking a step of differentiation always involves a combination of 3 things. It's a clarity of one's position, maintaining connection with the other, and tolerating the anxiety in the process. So for my client, it was about calming herself. Then it was about making a direct contact with her boss, speaking to her, not just phoning her, asking for feedback about how she was doing, and clarifying her position by saying in this new working environment, she just wasn't quite sure if she was meeting the expectations that they needed, and could they be clarified for her. And what happened? Well, her manager was in general very happy with the work that she was doing. She did make a couple of suggestions, and although they are slightly uncomfortable to receive, my client was able to tolerate the anxiety, and ultimately that gave her the reassurance that once she'd made those adjustments, she was on the right track. So that step of differentiation does involve risk, because you're not binding the anxiety in your usual way. So you might want to see it as an experiment. Just try some things out, try doing something different, and watch what happens. So, have have a go. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you for our next session.